Great, good morning. So, I'm Andy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Joseph. But before I start, I need a volunteer. Yeah, because I need a volunteer because I have here a flask. And I would like you to tell me what it says is in this flask.
World's worst smell.
Yep, world's worst smell. Fantastic. But I have 3 of these, so I'm going to need 2 more volunteers. Yep. 1 more volunteer. Anyone? Yeah, do you want to come up? So, a little bit later on in the service, we're going to be opening these. And what I want each of you 3 to do is have a look around this room and think, who would you most like to see open one of these flasks labelled World's Worst Smell? So have a think. It could be someone in your family, it could be a friend, it could be anyone. Any ideas? Who would you like to see open one?
Myself.
Yourself. Can you pick someone different?
My dad.
Your dad, great. Okay, how about you, Tiana?
Esther.
Esther, okay. And how about you?
Baba.
Your mum? Or Karis? Great. So, great. So just to remind me, you wanted your dad, you wanted Esther, and you wanted Karis. Brilliant. So thank you very much. You've been great volunteers. I've got something for you each just to say thank you for being such great volunteers. And you can go back to your seats, and a bit later on in the service, those 3 people that you nominated are going to get to open one of these. We'll see later what those are. So, before we get to that, we're going to talk a bit about Joseph. So if you remember from the video, Joseph was pretty annoying, wasn't he? Can you imagine if you had a brother and he kept on telling you what he'd been dreaming, and these dreams seemed to involve you ending up bowing down before him? You'd get really annoyed, wouldn't you? Well, Joseph's brothers, they get so annoyed that they decide to kill him, or to throw him in a well, or to sell him as a slave. Which, however annoying your brother might be, is probably going a bit far, isn't it? But Joseph's brothers, they decide to sell him as a slave. So things are looking pretty bad for Joseph, but it doesn't stop there. It's not the end of the story. In Egypt, as a slave, Joseph's life starts to get better. God is with Joseph. God makes things go well for him. And Potiphar, the man that Joseph's working for, he likes Joseph, he trusts Joseph. He allows Joseph to live in his house and puts him in charge over the whole house. So things are beginning to look up for Joseph. Or at least they are, until Potiphar's wife tells lies about Joseph, and Joseph is thrown into prison. So things are looking pretty bad again for Joseph. But once again, God is with Joseph, and things start to get better. The jailer in the prison likes Joseph. He trusts Joseph, and he starts to give Joseph more responsibility. Now, in prison, Joseph starts telling people what their dreams mean. One night, Pharaoh, who's like king of all Egypt, has some dreams which bother him. He dreams of 7 fat cows. And then along come 7 skinny cows. And the skinny cows eat the fat cows. Dreams are weird, right? Anyone here ever had that dream? No, that'd be strange. But Joseph tells Pharaoh that this dream is a message from God. It's a message telling him that there'll be 7 years when there's plenty of food, and this will be followed by 7 years when there'll be none. And Joseph tells Pharaoh that what you need to do is spend the next 7 years storing up the food so that you'll have plenty when the time of famine comes. Well, Pharaoh's so impressed by this that he decides to set Joseph free. He puts him in charge of storing up all the food, and he makes him the second most important person in all Egypt. That's pretty good for someone who started the story being sold by his brothers to be a slave, isn't it? Well, everything happens just as Joseph said it would. During 7 years where there's plenty of food, Joseph stores up the food. And then when the time of famine comes, there is enough food for Joseph to be able to give out food to everyone. But at this time, there's also a famine in the land where Joseph's brothers are living. But they've heard that there's food in Egypt. So these starving brothers travel to Egypt in the hope that they'll be able to get food. And on arriving in Egypt, they're met by Joseph. They bow down before him, just as he told them they would. And they end up receiving from Joseph both forgiveness and food. And so Joseph ends up saving the lives of these starving brothers who years before had tried to kill him, who had thrown him in a well and had sold him to be a slave. Now, it's time I'd like to open these. So if you're one of the people who were lucky enough to get nominated, please come up now. If you're sitting near the front, you might want to hold your nose. So it should be one more person. So please hold that a moment. There's one for you, Kais, and there's one for you. And the stoppers on these, they should unscrew. So what I'd like you to do is open it and then tell us what's inside. Okay, what have you got?
There's chocolate.
Chocolate?
Chocolate.
Chocolate.
Not the world's worst smell.
Does it make me a bad person that deep down I'm a bit disappointed that they didn't get to experience the world's worst smell? But thank you. You can go and sit down. Take your chocolate with you. So what our young volunteers earlier had thought they were doing was giving these people something nasty. But what these people ended up receiving turned out to be something good, right? Well, this is a bit like what we see in the story of Joseph. Joseph's brothers intend to do something nasty, but it ends up turning out for good. When Joseph's brothers finally meet Joseph, they're worried about how he's going to react to the people who had sold him to be a slave. But Joseph tells them not to be afraid. And he says these words, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." You intended to harm me, Joseph says, but God intended it for good. As we look at the world around us, we see so much which is intended for harm. We see so much nastiness. When I was a young child, I used to go out picking blackberries with my family. I've since discovered that when my wife Esther was young and used to do similar with her family, she used to alternate between picking one and putting it in her mouth and picking one and putting it in the box. But for me, I'd have never done that. For me, as a child, following the rules was far too important for me to have even considered that. So every blackberry I picked went in the box. Well, you can imagine how I felt one time when I saw that my sister, who was only a toddler, had her hands full of berries and juice all round her mouth and nothing in the box. How do you think I felt? Angry, yeah. So I did what every young child does who sees their siblings doing wrong. I tell my parents, "Look what she's doing." I wanted to get her into trouble. But what I didn't know was that the berries that she had found were poisonous. I had wanted to get her into trouble, but in drawing attention to it, I may have accidentally ended up saving her life. So often, as with Joseph's brothers, where humans intend harm, God can bring about good. When we look at the world around us, we see so much that's intended for harm. Perhaps we find ourselves asking, how can people be so nasty to us? Maybe we watch the news and we wonder, how is it that so much of human history is filled with war? And we ask, how can God allow that to happen? And often the answer is that we do not know. But what I would encourage you to remember is that where humans intend harm, God can bring about good. Sometimes it's not always easy for us to see it straight away. I never met one of my grandfathers. He died before I was born. During the Second World War, he was part of the British Army, which surrendered to the Japanese Army in Singapore. He spent the next few years in a prisoner of war camp, and the people there were treated incredibly badly. They were given so little food, they were made to work so incredibly hard. And even after the war was over, my grandfather experienced really poor health for the rest of his life. And you find yourself asking, where were you, God, when people intended so much harm? But what I didn't know for a very long time, until my grandmother once told me, was that it was in this prisoner of war camp that my grandfather had met a group of Christians. And it was through this group of Christians that his faith in Jesus had really come alive. It doesn't explain how bad things can happen, but it does give an illustration of how God can bring about good in a place where humans intend for harm. So let me encourage you, when you see things around you happening that you do not like, that are intended for harm, let me encourage you not to focus on those, but instead to ask yourself this question: what is it that I can see God doing in this situation for good? Because after all, God bringing good into a world where humans intend harm is what the gospel is all about. In the United Youth Group for the last couple of months, we've been looking at how, through the events of the Old Testament, we can get a glimpse of Jesus. And I think the life of Joseph gives us such a glimpse. Joseph, like Jesus, was sold in exchange for silver by someone who should have been one of those closest to him. And on the cross, what Judas Iscariot, what the chief priests, what the crowds who shouted "Crucify him," and what the Roman soldiers, what they intended for harm, God had all along intended for good. And just as Joseph, through the harm his brothers intended for him, is able to forgive and save those brothers, so too Jesus on the cross offers forgiveness and salvation for us. You intended it for harm, Joseph says, but God intended it for good.